There are very few countries in Europe that have such a good relationship with China, and potentially Hungary is the country that has the best relationship with China from the European countries. Hungary is involved in multiple culture war conflicts and therefore needs to look for friends everywhere.
Well, I'm having a good time at the Tusványos Festival in Romania, which is an ethnic festival for Hungarian Romanians. There's a lot of Hungarians in Romania. Hungary borders Ukraine. I learned there's 150,000 Hungarians in Ukraine, which obviously colors the relationship between Hungary, Russia, Ukraine, and the war. Very interesting. There's a lot of scholars here at Tusványos, in addition to the food trucks, the music, the kids stuff, and the camping. One of the scholars who I met the other day at the Danube Institute in Budapest is Dr. Eric Hendriks. And we're going to talk a little bit about one aspect of Hungary's foreign policy. Dr. Hendriks, thanks very much for meeting with us today.
Oh, thank you, Ezra. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. Now, give our viewers a little bit of a biography. You have studied in a great variety of places. Give us a little bit of a bio.
Well, I did my master's at the University of Chicago, my PhD in Germany, and then I did a postdoc in sociology at Peking University in China, and I lived for 6 years in Beijing. And then I came back to Europe, worked a little bit at the German universities, and now I'm here, a visiting fellow at the Danube Institute, which is a think tank in Budapest.
Well, that's incredible, and I mean, you know so many languages. That's more common in Europe than in North America, but I'm still amazed by it. Hey, I want to talk to you about one particular thing. There's so many interesting things about Hungary, but there's some tension between America and Hungary. Now, I think it's exacerbated by the fact that the Biden administration has certain strong views on immigration, LGBT, the war in Ukraine that maybe is a little more elevated than if it were a Republican. But I think it's stressing the relationship between Hungary and America. I could be wrong, but if that's true, America's not the only superpower anymore. There's China, and you spent some time, as you just mentioned, in Beijing University. Can you talk for a bit, and feel free to go deep? Tell me the tension between America and Hungary and how China is in some ways filling the void, at least economically. Give me your thoughts on that.
So Hungary has a unique relationship both with the United States and with China. So first of all, about the American relationship. It's very interesting that Hungary has gotten such a prominent role in the American culture wars. So if you talk to people on the American right, you often hear positive opinions about Hungary. If you talk to people on the American left, you often hear negative opinions. And I think that other countries in Europe do not have such a pronounced position. Hungary has been really dragged into the culture war, and that has regretfully for Hungary also potentially some negative consequences, namely that it's now facing a White House that is mildly distrustful. Biden has not said flattering things about Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, in the past, some very unflattering things. So that's really something unique about Hungary in its relationships to the United States. So it's gotten, for better or worse, it's gotten really deep into the American discussions.
It's become a kind of partisan football in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And the relationship between China and Hungary is also very interesting because there are very few countries in Europe that have such a good relationship with China, and potentially Hungary is the country that has the best relationship with China from the European countries. Now, Wang Yi, when he was here, of the Foreign Ministry of China, he was he visited Hungary in a very prominent way. So what you're seeing is that Hungary has a very partisan, polarized position in America, and in a relatively good relationship with China. But how does this work out? Because it's especially the American right that is distrustful towards China, and it is very competitive towards China at the moment. So Hungary I think it's fair to say that the Hungarians I've met feel very close to the United States, closely follow American politics, and there are a lot of intellectual and political affinities and sympathies. With China, for China, the reaching out towards China is part of a more general outreach campaign, whereas Hungary doesn't want to be doesn't want to have the sense that it's on the edge of civilization. It wants to be the center of something, and therefore it has been reaching out in various directions. It has been reaching out to Turkey via a 2-yearly festival in which it's a little bit creative and wild, but Hungarians dress up like Huns, and they celebrate their shared supposed steppe character with the Turks and with the Altai people from Central Asia, and they get delegates from Central Asia and Turkey to Hungary to have this pan-Altaic celebration. And it's part of a more general outreach. So with China, since 2019, Hungary has been symbolically and in more real ways been connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Belt and Road is a little bit of a mysterious thing, which I'm not sure if most Americans truly have a good sense of what it is. So China is an enormous surplus economy. It has an enormous industrial base. It exports products, but it sells much more products than it buys. So it has enormous surpluses, so they need to invest that. So there's money, Chinese money, going all around the world. And a few years ago, they decided to put a brand on all those dispersed economic activities and say this is part of a One Belt, One Road umbrella. So it's mostly a kind of branding of things that are already ongoing. But then the Communist Party has also been trying to create more structure and further use these investments to further their influence abroad. And most European countries have not, and the EU has not been connected with the Belt and Road Initiative. But Hungary has decided to do so because they want to be on the edge of something. They want to be in the center of something. So they're reaching out in all directions. And it's creative, it's interesting, but at the same time, it's a difficult role, because of course we're talking about tensions between the Biden White House and Hungary, but also very strong tensions between the European Commission and the European Parliament on the one hand, and Hungary on the other. So Hungary is involved in multiple culture war conflicts, and therefore needs to look for friends everywhere.
Isn't that interesting? Well, I mean, Canada is very skeptical of China these days. First of all, China kidnapped a couple of Canadians and held them for years, and that deeply eroded public support for China. And then recently, we've learned about political interference. So I think China-Canada relations actually have never been this bad, at least for generations. And then there's people worried about industrial espionage and other espionage. Like there was a worry about Huawei installing 5G technology in Canada. I don't think there's a large Chinese population in Hungary, correct me if I'm wrong, whereas there's a substantial one in Canada. So I'm not sure if political interference in the community is as much a threat, but are Hungarians worried about industrial espionage? Are they worried about, Chinese corruption, financial corruption? Are the worries that North America has and the rest of Europe, are they shared? Are they real worries for Hungary?
Well, Hungary is a small country. It has just over 10 million inhabitants. It has a mid-sized economy for Central European standards. So, it's an interesting place. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have come and visit the Hungarian community if it wasn't an interesting community. At the same time, it's a small country, so it doesn't play on this really large geopolitical level. So when you look at the world from an American point of view, or even from a Canadian point of view, you're looking at a really big geopolitical chessboard. And that's just not the dominant framing looking at the world from Hungary, because these large rivalries are not really Hungary's concern. Hungary is just a mid-sized European country in Central Europe. So I think that's the real difference. Of course, there are some, always some suspicions towards Chinese investments and artists, and worries that it might, Huawei throughout Europe. Also in Hungary, there were concerns about Huawei. But then I think that in the end, they take a greater significance in North America, because there is the geopolitical rivalry between North America and China, which just doesn't play a role for countries like Hungary.
I look at Russia and how the American sanctions on Russia, UK sanctions, Canadian sanctions, were supposed to bring Russia to its knees. And I don't think that's happened, in part because Russia's economy is resource-based, and the world needs oil. The world needs natural gas. You can't just turn it off. But I think also because China, Iran, and Turkey and other countries filled some of that American void. And I wonder if China is looking at Hungary in the same way. So if the White House pushes Hungary away, China will be right there. And whether it's financial investments or, giving Hungary some sort of moral support, has China taken advantage of tensions between the Biden administration and Viktor Orban? Is there anything you can point to where China sort of, there's an old saying where two argue, a third grabs the hat. Is there a way that China's taken advantage of the rivalry and said, we'll be there for you, we'll take that if Biden won't? Has any of that happened?
Well, I think that you should realize that the Chinese cultural and political influence in Europe is fairly limited. It's really, in these parts of the world, people follow English-speaking news. People follow American news. People are also interested in what's happening in Canada. People are relatively well informed about what's happening in the English-speaking world. So in terms of culture and politics and ideological sympathies, the whole of Europe and also Hungary is looking to North America. But China is an important player economically and industrially. So it's a little bit, these are different types of influence and power. There might be some economic influence in Hungary and in Eastern Europe. It's not so large yet, but it doesn't translate directly into cultural clout or political influence, because ultimately there are not a lot of ideological sympathies between a country like Hungary and a country like China. China is led by a Leninist party state. Hungary had very negative experiences in the past with communism, as you well know. So it's not an ideological sympathy, but there are important trade relationships being set up.
Very interesting. Well, Dr. Eric Hendriks, what a pleasure to talk with you a bit. And you're at a very interesting institute, the Danube Institute. We had a pleasure of visiting the office, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Tusványos Festival. Too. Yeah, we are for sure. I'm hanging out. It's so hot out. We're standing in the shade here. I was hanging out near the ice cream store, and I think I was getting a little too comfortable with the. Those are the only words I've learned in Hungarian, is how to order ice cream. I'm joking around. Thanks very much for talking with us. There you have it. Stay with us for more from Tusványos and from our trip to Hungary, neighboring Romania. You can see all of our journalism at thetruthabouthungary.com. And if you want to chip in, because as you know, we take no money from government. Our journalism is citizen journalism. If you want to help us out, you can chip in at that same website, thetruthabouthungary.com. Thanks. I'm in Eastern Europe asking the question, what's the truth about Hungary? What is that country like? And why do leftists in the West hate it so much? To see all of my reports and to chip into our crowd-funded citizen journalism, go to thetruthabouthungary.com.